He arrived early, not because he liked crowds, but because early meant calm. The sun was still low, spreading soft light across the wide airfield. The smell of grass mixed with fuel hung in the air. He walked slowly, careful not to rush the small hand in his. His child looked everywhere at once, eyes wide, steps bouncing, asking questions that spilled out without pause. He answered each one with patience, even when he did not know the answer. He had learned that listening mattered more than sounding smart. They found their seats without trouble. Row 8 was close enough to see the runway clearly, but far enough to feel safe. He liked that. He always liked a little distance. He set down a small backpack between his feet and checked it without thinking. Water, snacks, ear protection, a folded jacket. He did not realize he was doing it. Habits stayed long after the reason for them had gone. Around them, families filled the stands. Some wore bright shirts with jet logos. Others carried flags or small cameras. Laughter rolled through the rows as people greeted friends or took photos. A few children ran up and down the aisle until a voice called them back. He watched all of this with a calm face. He had learned how to blend in. No one looked twice at a tired single dad trying to give his child a good day. His clothes were plain. Clean, but worn at the edges. The kind of clothes chosen for comfort, not attention. His hair was neatly trimmed, but not styled. His face showed lines that came from long nights and early mornings. The kind that came from responsibility, not age alone. If someone studied him closely, they might notice how straight he sat, or how his eyes scanned the area now and then. But people rarely studied strangers. His child leaned closer and asked if the planes would be loud. He smiled and nodded, then gently placed the ear protection over small ears. He tested the fit, careful and precise. The child giggled, the sound bright and free. That sound eased something tight inside his chest. He lived for moments like that. Moments when he knew he was doing something right. An announcement echoed across the field. The show would begin soon. A cheer rose from the crowd. He did not cheer. He never had. Instead, he rested his hands on his knees and breathed in slowly. The wide-open sky above the runway pulled at him in a way he could not explain. It always had. The sky was honest. It did not pretend. A man sitting a few seats away glanced at him and then looked away. To him, the single dad was just another face in the crowd. Nothing special. Nothing worth remembering. The man turned back to his phone. That was fine. He preferred it that way. The child pointed toward the far end of the runway, where ground crews moved with purpose. Vehicles rolled past in careful lines. Flags snapped in the breeze. The child asked how fast the planes could fly. He paused before answering. He chose simple words. Very fast, he said. Faster than most people can imagine. The child smiled, satisfied. The noise began softly at first. A distant rumble, like thunder far away. He felt it before he heard it. A vibration that ran through the ground and into his bones. His jaw tightened for just a second. He closed his eyes and opened them again. He was here. He was safe. He was not alone. He looked down at his child, who was gripping the seat with excitement, eyes fixed on the runway. That small face held nothing but joy. He felt a familiar mix of pride and fear. Pride that he could give this moment. Fear that the world might one day take something back. He pushed the thought away. As the sound grew louder, people around him stood to get a better view. He stayed seated. He knew standing would not change what mattered. The jets had not appeared yet, but he could picture them clearly. The shape, the movement, the way light slid along metal. He knew it as well as he knew his own hands. His child asked why he was so quiet. He smiled again and said he was just listening. That was true. He was listening to more than sound. He was listening to memory, to echoes of a life that felt both close and very far away. Years ago, he had also sat and listened, but in very different places. Places where silence meant danger and noise meant action. Places where decisions had to be made in seconds, not minutes. He did not think about those details now. He had learned how to close certain doors. Still, the sound of engines had a way of slipping through the cracks. The announcer's voice rose again, full of energy. The crowd responded with applause. He joined in lightly, clapping just enough so his child would not notice the difference. He did not want to stand out, even in small ways. Blending in had become second nature. A breeze moved through the stands, lifting hair and hats. He felt it on his face and welcomed it. It carried the smell of fuel again, sharper now. Some people wrinkled their noses. He did not. The smell meant motion. It meant preparation. It meant that something was about to happen. His child leaned against his arm, comforted by the solid presence beside them. He adjusted his position, without thinking, creating a small shield from the crowd. He had done that so many times before. On buses, in lines, in busy streets. Always placing himself between his child and the world. The rumble grew into a roar. Heads tilted back. Cameras lifted. A few people shouted with excitement. He felt his heart beat a little faster, but his face stayed calm. He had trained himself well. The first jet appeared at the edge of the runway, dark against the bright sky. The crowd gasped. His child squeezed his arm and laughed. He nodded, eyes fixed forward. The jet moved with smooth power, rolling forward as if the ground itself were giving way. As it lifted into the air, something inside him shifted. Not pain, not joy. Something deeper. A sense of recognition. Like hearing an old song you thought you had forgotten, only to realize every word is still there. He told himself he was just tired. That this was normal. Anyone would feel something watching machines like that rise into the sky. He told himself many things. Some of them were even true. More jets followed. The noise filled the air completely now, leaving no room for small talk. The crowd was fully focused. He noticed how the pilots moved, even from a distance. Small details. Smooth turns. Clean lines. His mind followed their paths without effort. His child asked how the pilots could see where they were going. He answered gently, explaining about instruments and training, about trust in systems and people. He kept his words simple. He left out the parts about fear. He always did. The jets climbed higher, then vanished for a moment. The sound faded just enough to let people breathe. Some clapped again. He did not this time. He stayed still, eyes on the sky, waiting. He did not know why his chest felt tight. He did not know why his fingers curled slightly, as if around something invisible. He only knew that a part of him was awake now. A part he had kept quiet for a long time. His child tugged his sleeve and pointed upward. He followed the small finger and looked into the wide blue above them. Empty for now, calm, full of promise. To everyone else in the stands, this was just the beginning of a show. To him, it felt like the opening of a door he had not planned to walk through. Not today, he told himself. Today was about being a dad. About sitting in row 8 and enjoying the moment. The sky answered with another distant roar, and the crowd leaned forward as one. He stayed seated, steady, and quiet, holding his child's hand as the sound rolled back toward them, stronger than before. The sky had changed since the first jets passed. It was not just blue anymore. Shadows of aircraft began to stretch across it, cutting lines that were sharper than sunlight. People in the stands leaned forward, shielding their eyes from the glare, but he stayed calm. He knew the calm was temporary. Something about the movement of the jets made him alert. Though he did not understand why nearby, pilots moved with quiet precision. The crowd could not see them, but he felt their presence in the way the noise changed. Not every sound was the same. Some engines had a sharper pitch, a different rhythm. He noticed things like that without thinking, a skill long ingrained. It made him feel connected to something he had left behind, something invisible to the world around him. Over the loudspeakers, an announcer's voice boomed about the maneuvers they were about to see. He tuned it out mostly because he already knew what would come. The planes moved faster now, appearing closer and sharper. His child pressed against him, small hands gripping his arm, excitement clear in every movement. He glanced down and smiled, keeping his expression calm. The child did not need to know. He felt the same wonder that sometimes frightened him. In the distance, on a separate control tower, voices moved over radios. Words he could not understand reached him in fragments. Then he heard something different. A single name, spoken softly, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. Falcon 0. He froze. The sound was familiar, but he could not place it immediately. He did not move, not wanting to draw attention. Other people around him were focused on the jets, but he felt the world narrow, shrinking to that single name. His fingers twitched, a reaction he could not fully control. He was not supposed to react. He had not reacted in years. A jet roared past, close enough to shake the stands. People clapped and shouted, their voices rising with the engines. He did not join in. Instead, he focused on the memory that came with the whisper. He remembered the feel of a cockpit, the pressure of missions, the split-second decisions that had once decided life and death. That life felt distant now, buried under years of quiet sacrifice. Yet the whisper reached him like it had never been forgotten. His child asked if something was wrong. He smiled and ruffled the hair, saying only that he was listening. That was true. He was listening to more than just the sound around him. He was listening to a part of himself he had left behind, buried under years of routine, responsibility, and being a single parent. From the control tower, more whispers moved through the radios. Pilots discussed formations, angles, speeds. And then, again, that name. Falcon 0. This time, the voice was not whispering. It carried certainty, respect, recognition. The squadron knew something he had long thought invisible. Recognition that had never been spoken aloud, not in medals, not in ceremonies, not in public acknowledgement. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the wind on his face. He breathed in slowly, grounding himself. The child leaned into him, sensing the tension but trusting him. He adjusted the small hand in his, holding it securely. Some instincts never faded, and protection was one of them. The jets performed a sharp turn, and the crowd rose again, following their movement. He noticed small details in the patterns. The precision, the timing, the way each plane reacted to the others. These were not ordinary maneuvers. The pilots were doing something beyond the public display, something meant only for those who knew the code. He remembered similar patterns from long ago. He had flown missions where seconds mattered, where a turn too wide could cost lives. He had guided planes, led teams, made choices that no one would ever know about. That memory was sharp now, edged with adrenaline. Even as he sat quietly in row 8, the sound of engines and the whisper of the call sign unlocked it. The child whispered something about the noise being scary. He laughed softly and said it was only a little loud. A small lie, but a protective one. He could not share the history of those jets. Not today, not here. Today was about wonder, about a child seeing the sky open wide. Yet he could not stop himself from noticing the discipline behind the spectacle. a group of pilots spoke again, and he caught more words. Instructions, acknowledgement, code phrases. And then it happened. The squadron shifted. Jets moved in a formation that was not on the program. The pattern was different, precise, almost personal. Even from a distance, he could feel the intent behind it. Something rose in him, an unfamiliar mix of pride, fear, and awe. The crowd did not see what he saw. They saw showmanship. He saw communication, recognition, a subtle salute, a hidden message meant for someone who had earned it in silence. His child noticed the change in him and asked again why he was so quiet. He did not answer immediately. He looked into the sky, following the path of the lead jet. The pattern reminded him of coordination, trust, skill, the things he had taught himself to rely on, and then pass on to others without notice. He told his child only that the pilots were doing a special trick, something they practiced for a long time. That was true, but it was only half of it. He felt a mixture of tension and relief. The tension came from memories he could not fully ignore. The relief came from knowing that even now, years later, someone remembered him. The pilots, the squadron, the air itself, they carried his presence in some unspoken way. The child leaned on him again, completely trusting, unaware of the storm of thought in the adult. Beside them, jets broke apart and reformed, moving in patterns that were both elegant and powerful. People clapped and cheered. He did not. He only watched, heart steady, mind racing. Recognition had a strange weight. It was not fame. It was not applause. It was acknowledgement from those who understood the full measure of what had once been required. He felt the urge to speak, to say something, but stopped himself. Words were not needed. The moment existed without them. The sky had already communicated. The patterns, the whispers, the careful movements of the pilots, all of it spoke to him directly. Another jet roared overhead, leaving a trail that shimmered in the sun. His child jumped slightly, laughing, and he joined in silently, squeezing the small hand with gentle reassurance. He smiled inwardly. This moment belonged to the child. That was the only truth that mattered outside of the sky above. He remembered the first time he had flown in formation, when mistakes could not be corrected by luck. The precision, the discipline, the trust in others, all of it had been critical. He had carried that training into every part of life afterward, even into parenting, even into simple trips like this one. He realized that it had never left him. The pilot's formation shifted again. This time, the movement was unmistakable. A subtle pattern, a signature in the sky, made only for those who knew to see it. The whisper of Falcon 0 had transformed into a silent acknowledgement across the field. He did not call attention to it. He only recognized it. That was enough. He felt a tightness in his chest and allowed it. No one would see the small wave of emotion. He kept it tucked beneath calm expressions and gentle touches. He had spent years hiding strength and vulnerability side by side. The balance was delicate, but necessary. The crowd continued to cheer, but their voices blurred around him. He was elsewhere, in a quiet mental space where only recognition mattered. It was strange to be acknowledged in such a way, by strangers who were not really strangers, by people who knew what no one else could understand. His child looked up at him again, eyes shining. He smiled and said quietly, "The planes are amazing, aren't they?" The words were simple, but true. They captured everything. That could be said without breaking the moment. The announcer came back on, talking over the loudspeakers, but he barely listened. The message in the sky had already arrived. Falcon 0 had been spoken, acknowledged, and honored in a way that only he could feel. The world around him remained unaware, yet everything had changed for him. The jets began to move toward the far end of the runway, preparing for the next maneuver. He adjusted the small backpack between his feet and straightened his posture. His child leaned against him, calm again. The air carried the smell of fuel and ozone. The wind shifted. The sky was wide, and he felt a sense of connection he had not felt in years. He realized he had been holding his breath for a long time. Slowly, deliberately, he exhaled. The moment was not over, but he felt grounded. He had been acknowledged in a way that mattered more than applause or recognition from strangers. The pilots had seen him, or at least his history, and it was enough. The child looked up at the next jet, pointing, excited. He joined in the pointing, showing his attention to detail, explaining in simple words what was happening. He did not explain everything. Some things had to remain quiet, preserved. But he could guide his child's eyes and mind toward the beauty and precision of what they were witnessing. The sky stretched out above them, full of potential and hidden messages. The crowd cheered again. He clapped lightly this time, enough to show presence, but his mind stayed partly in the quiet space where acknowledgement had reached him. Recognition, subtle and unseen, had entered his day without changing the world around them. He knew that the memory of this moment would last. Long after the engines faded, after the crowd left and the stands emptied, he would carry the whisper of Falcon 0 in his chest. It was a reminder, not of glory, but of identity, of who he had been, who he was, and the quiet strength he carried forward. The next maneuver began, and he felt the rhythm of the jets in his body, recalling old habits and instincts. He sat upright, hand on the child's shoulder, and watched closely. Every movement told a story. Every sound carried weight. He felt alive in a way he had not allowed himself for a long time. And yet he remained calm. He had learned long ago the power of quiet observation. Row 8 had never felt so alive. The crowd was caught up in spectacle, but he understood something deeper. He felt a hidden current, a silent tribute above them, a whisper that had reached across years and distance. Touch sound of engines faded for a moment, leaving the air crisp and heavy with tension. He let himself breathe slowly, trying to gather his thoughts. Sitting in row 8, he realized the memories had returned in full force. Not the pleasant ones from weekends or family trips, but the kind that carried weight and consequence. Places he had been where decisions meant the difference between life and death. Choices made in split seconds, with no room for error. Those years had left marks no one could see. He remembered the first mission that had truly changed him. He had been younger then, confident in skill, full of purpose. A plane squadron under his command had taken off in formation, just like the jets above. But this time, the mission was dangerous beyond anything he had trained for. They were not just flying, they were responsible for lives on the ground, people counting on them in ways the world would never know. A decision came suddenly, something that went against protocol, but saved those lives. It cost him his chance for recognition. No medals, no headlines, just a quiet exit from the world he had known. He had carried that choice with him for years, wrapped in silence. Not everyone understood the weight of decisions. No one would applaud. He had been good at blending in, at hiding the past. No one in the stands would guess what he had done or who he had been. To them, he was just another man, a father trying to enjoy an air show with his child. That anonymity had been comforting, a shield against the world. Yet, as he watched the jets perform, memories resurfaced with clarity. The precision, the coordination, the trust in each other, all of it reminded him of his own history. Every maneuver above was like a message in a language only he could read. His chest tightened with a mix of longing and pride. He had once been part of something bigger than himself, and even if the world had moved on, he had not forgotten. He remembered nights spent in dimly lit briefing rooms. Maps spread across tables, faces intent and focused. Plans made in whispers, adjustments calculated in heartbeats. The tension had been constant, but the satisfaction had come silently. Success was measured in lives saved, not accolades. Failure had consequences no one would ever speak of. He carried both silently, shaping the person sitting here today. Not his child tugged at his sleeve, asking a question about the planes. He smiled and answered simply, explaining how the pilots worked together, how they trusted one another. He left out the danger, the fear, the moments when seconds stretched into eternity. Some things were too heavy for a child's imagination. Still, he wanted the child to feel the awe, the wonder, the discipline. He wanted them to understand that dedication meant more than applause. The roar of the jets returned, louder now, closer. The child squealed with delight, leaning forward on the edge of the seat. He held the small hands and guided the eyes skyward, careful to point out details. The crowd cheered, but he was in a different space, caught between past and present. He noticed how each jet adjusted to the others, how even slight movements could make or break a formation. It reminded him of teamwork, of reliance, of trust earned over years. He remembered the faces of his old squad, the quiet determination, the unspoken bonds. They had risked everything for one another. They had known fear, and yet they had pressed forward. Recognition had been scarce, but honor had been present in every choice. That honor had stayed with him, even when the world moved on. Even now, in row 8, watching an air show meant for the public, that sense of duty whispered back to him. He glanced down at his child, who was wide-eyed and laughing. The innocence of wonder was striking, a reminder that life moved forward. He felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the years he could not reclaim, for the missions that could never be spoken of. Relief that the child had not yet inherited the weight of such choices. That there was still space for joy without burden. The announcer's voice filled the stands again, speaking over loudspeakers, but his attention remained on the sky. A jet arced gracefully, and he followed it with trained eyes, noting the precision. The pilot's movements seemed deliberate, almost personal. Each formation felt like a message, a silent acknowledgement that resonated in him. The whisper of Falcon 0 earlier had shifted something inside, opening a door he thought long closed. He thought about why he had left the service. Not because he wanted to, but because life had demanded a different role. His child, born into a world that needed him more than the skies did, had become the center of everything. He had traded missions for bedtime stories, briefings for playgrounds, discipline for tenderness. The transition had been gradual, but complete. Still, some part of him remained in the air, where he had been known, and needed in ways only he could understand. A sharp turn of a jet brought his focus back fully. The roar was intense, shaking the stands. People around him clapped, shouted, laughed. He did not. His hands remained on the small shoulders beside him, steady, calm. The child's laughter echoed, light and free, a grounding force. He smiled faintly, appreciating the contrast between past and present. The sky held memories, but the seat beside him held life. He remembered a time when a single mistake could cost lives. A moment when a split-second decision determined who lived and who did not. He had made those decisions countless times, and the weight had never left him. Even in civilian life, it lingered, shaping choices, shaping patience, shaping quiet strength. That strength was here, now, protective and guiding. The jets formed a line overhead and broke into an unexpected pattern. The crowd gasped and clapped, unaware of the significance. He recognized the intent immediately. The pilots were signaling, subtly, in a language only those who understood the risks, the skill, the dedication could read. His chest tightened again, pride mingling with a deep ache. Recognition, though silent, had reached him. He had been careful all these years to hide his past. No one in row 8 would guess the stories behind the eyes, the history behind the calm presence. He had kept his life ordinary, focusing on the child, on work, on daily routines. The public acknowledgement of his past had been non-existent. But the sky above whispered differently. The pilots remembered, in a way that bypassed words. They saw what mattered. His child asked why the planes moved together so perfectly. He explained teamwork, trust, and practice, careful to make it simple. He left out the life-and-death stakes, the anxiety, the pressure. That knowledge would come later, perhaps, when the child was ready. For now, it was enough to point, to watch, to marvel. The lessons of the past were hidden in gestures and patterns, waiting for understanding in time. The sound of jets shifted again, a low rumble that vibrated through the stands. He felt it in his bones, a reminder of the reality once lived. He let the sensation wash over him without reacting outwardly. The child leaned into him again, whispering excited questions. He answered softly, keeping the voice calm and steady. Some parts of himself remained invisible, protected, sacred. Memories of colleagues, missions, late nights, and tough choices played quietly behind his eyes. Recognition had been rare. Praise had been rarer. The missions mattered not for applause, but for impact. That reality had shaped him into the man sitting here, composed, patient, aware. The contrast between the sky and the stands, between past and present, was stark but grounding. Another jet broke formation for a maneuver, leaving the crowd amazed. He studied the movements with detailed attention, noting precision and coordination. The whispers of acknowledgement floated again in his mind, reminders that even when the world had moved on, those who truly understood still remembered. He had carried that memory alone for years, until now. The child clutched his arm, pointing toward the sunlit trails left behind by the jets. He smiled faintly and followed the gaze, noting the beauty, the motion, the silent messages embedded in the performance. Some things were meant only for those who could see beyond the show, and he had learned to do just that. The announcer's words faded into background noise. He focused entirely on the sky, the signals, the patterns, the subtle nods that acknowledged past courage and present calm. Recognition did not need a stage. It existed quietly, in moments like this, in gestures and formations, in names whispered just for him. The jets rose higher, the roar diminishing slightly as distance increased. The crowd cheered, some pointing, some filming. He remained seated, steady, grounded. The child leaned into him, small fingers curling around his hand. The sky above had spoken. The past had returned in echoes, and he had remained strong. He had watched, he had remembered, he had acknowledged silently. Row 8 felt like more than a seat now. It felt like a place where worlds met, the everyday life of a single dad, the weight of history, the unspoken recognition from those who once shared the skies. He exhaled slowly, feeling a sense of quiet completion. The past was not erased, but it was honored. And the present held life, joy, and possibility. The next series of maneuvers began, and he adjusted the child on his lap, pointing, explaining, guiding, protecting. The jets performed with brilliance and precision, but he was focused on more than spectacle. He was focused on connection, on recognition, on legacy, and on love. And in that quiet space between engine roars, cheers, and sky, he found a rare peace, fragile but undeniable. The roar of the jets grew louder again, stronger than before. It filled the air and made the ground vibrate underfoot. People stood and cheered, raising phones and cameras to capture the spectacle. But he stayed seated in row 8, holding the small hands of his child, his eyes fixed on the sky. There was a stillness in him, a focus that made the crowd blur around the edges. He knew what was coming, even if no one else could see it yet. The jets moved in formation, sleek and precise, a perfect line slicing through the blue. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the pattern shifted. They broke from the expected display, leaving trails in the sky that formed shapes unfamiliar to the audience. But he recognized them immediately. Every curve, every angle, every sudden twist was deliberate. It was a code he had known once, the language of pilots who trusted each other completely. And it was meant for him. A voice broke through the conchatter faintly, just enough to catch his attention. Falcon 0. It was not loud, not a public announcement, but it carried across the distance in a way that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. His heart skipped, then beat faster. The pilots were acknowledging him, honoring him in a way the world had never done. He swallowed hard, unsure whether to let the emotion show. He did not need the crowd's understanding. This was for him alone. The jets arced higher, then dived in perfect synchrony. Trails of smoke marked their paths, forming sharp, elegant lines across the sky. The audience gasped and clapped, thinking it was a spectacular trick. But he knew it was a message, a silent salute. He felt it in his chest, deep and warm. After years of quiet sacrifice and hidden service, someone had remembered. Someone had chosen to honor the life he had led when no one else would. His child looked up at him, eyes wide. "They're amazing," the child said. He nodded, smiling faintly. "They are," he said softly. But there was more than admiration in his tone. There was recognition and a quiet acknowledgement that some things are bigger than applause. He held his child close, letting the small body lean against him. He did not want to break the magic of the moment, but his heart ached with the weight of memory and pride. The jets split and reformed, faster and closer than before. The maneuvers were impossible for most pilots, but these men handled them with grace and skill. He could feel the rhythm, the trust, the discipline. Each plane moved as though it was connected by an invisible thread, guided by instinct and training. And for him, it was personal. Each line in the sky spoke of past missions, past decisions, past courage. He remembered a night long ago when he had made a choice no one could understand. A choice that had saved lives, but ended his recognition in the public eye. No medals, no ceremonies, no stories. Just quiet, invisible sacrifice. And now, decades later, the sky itself carried an acknowledgement. The pilots above were sending a message that reached beyond words. Straight to his heart, the child tugged on his sleeve, asking another question. Why are they doing that? He smiled, bending slightly to whisper an answer simple enough for a child. They're showing something special, he said. Just for someone they remember. The child tilted their head, not fully understanding, but satisfied with the answer. And that was enough. He could not explain the full weight of recognition, not here, not now. Some things are understood only by those who have lived them, and some gestures are meant to be felt, not spoken. The formation tightened again, flying low over the runway. The crowd erupted in applause, some standing, some shouting. He remained still, calm but inwardly overwhelmed. Every twist of metal, every roar of engines, every precise movement was a tribute. Acknowledgement of years spent in the shadows, of decisions made in silence, of courage that had never been publicly praised. A moment came when the jets flew in a perfect V. Pointing directly toward row 8, his breath caught. The crowd followed the movement with awe, but they did not know what it meant. He felt it deep in his chest, a personal salute, a gesture of respect that transcended words. He swallowed hard, holding back tears, holding steady for his child. The child asked again, curiosity shining. Are they saying something to you? He laughed softly, a little breathless. Maybe, he said. And in that small, careful answer, He acknowledged the truth without shattering the child's sense of wonder. Some moments are too powerful to explain. They must simply be felt. The announcer tried to regain the audience's attention, speaking loudly over the roar. But the moment had passed beyond words. The sky carried the message. Recognition had arrived silently and profoundly, and he was the only one fully aware of it. The jets swooped low once more, leaving trails that glimmered in the sunlight. Each movement was deliberate, each path intentional. And then, for a fleeting moment, they hovered in formation above row 8. The engines roared, shaking the ground beneath, and the pilot spoke again, the name echoing faintly through their radios, almost like a whisper in the wind. Falcon 0. He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the pulse, feeling the years collapse into this one moment. No one in the stands would understand. They would remember only the beauty, the skill, the spectacle. But for him, it was a personal acknowledgement, a culmination of a life lived in service, a validation of choices made long ago in quiet courage. His child looked up at him again, sensing the emotion, and smiled. "You're happy, aren't you?" The child asked. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Yes," he said simply. "Very happy." The jets began their final run, climbing higher and faster, their trails forming intricate patterns that glittered in the sun. The crowd erupted in cheers, cameras flashing, phones recording. He remained seated, arms around the child, taking it all in. The performance was magnificent, but the message, the whisper, the acknowledgement, had reached him in a way that transcended spectacle. He thought about the past again, about the missions, the quiet sacrifices, the invisible work. He realized that the years of anonymity, of quiet life as a single father, had led to this moment. The sky had spoken. Recognition had arrived, silent, personal, profound. And it was enough. The jets lifted higher, engines fading slightly as distance increased. The crowd clapped and shouted, and he joined in softly, not for show, but in gratitude. The child's small hand remained in his, squeezing it lightly. The moment was theirs, unspoken, shared. He exhaled, letting a sense of peace settle over him. For the first time in a long time, he felt that the life he had led, both in service and at home, was understood. The acknowledgement had come not through medals or applause, but through the precise dance of pilots and planes, a language only he could read fully. The child laughed again, pointing at the sun reflecting off a distant wing. He smiled genuinely, holding the small hand and guiding the gaze. The sky above was wide, full of meaning, and for a fleeting moment, everything aligned, past and present, courage and love, recognition and life. He knew this moment would stay with him forever. The whisper of Falcon 0 would echo in his heart long after the crowd had left, long after the engines had gone silent. It was a reminder that true acknowledgement does not always need a stage. It can arrive quietly through subtle gestures, through understanding, through those who see and remember what the world often forgets. The performance ended, and the jets roared away, climbing beyond the horizon. The crowd began to settle, some talking, some leaving, some replaying videos on their phones. He remained seated, still holding the child, letting the moment linger. The sky had spoken, and he had heard it. He felt seen, honored, and quietly proud. Row 8 had transformed from a simple seat into a place of recognition. Not fame, not glory, not public applause, but a personal salute, a tribute from those who understood, from those who had flown and fought, from those who knew courage and quiet sacrifice. He had carried that past with him for years, and now it had been acknowledged. In silence, in the sky, in the roar of engines, he had been honored. He stood finally, lifting the child gently, looking around at the crowd. Everything appeared ordinary to others, but he saw the extraordinary. He felt the weight lift slightly, replaced by warmth and quiet pride. The child laughed again, unaware of the full depth, but sharing in the wonder. And he smiled, knowing that some stories do not need words, that some recognition is strongest when felt rather than spoken. The jets disappeared into the distance, their engines fading until the sky was calm again. The crowd began to stir, people standing, talking, gathering their belongings, their attention moving to the next thing. But he remained in row 8 for a moment longer, holding his child, letting the quiet settle. The noise of applause and excitement had faded, leaving a stillness that felt different, heavier, and yet comforting. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of what had just happened. Recognition had come, but not in the way he had expected. It was personal, quiet, and profound. He looked down at the small face beside him, the eyes still wide with wonder. The child had seen the planes, the speed, the formations, the trails of smoke, but the child did not understand the deeper meaning. And that was fine. Some lessons were too heavy for now. Some acknowledgments were meant to be felt, not explained. He smiled and gently brushed a strand of hair from the child's forehead, marveling at how much life could be held in such a small person. He thought about the years behind him, the missions, the quiet sacrifices, the choices made without recognition. All of it had led to this moment, sitting quietly with his child, holding a hand, feeling seen without the world knowing. The acknowledgement of the pilots, the whisper of Falcon 0, had reached him deeply. For the first time in a long time, he felt that his life, the choices, the courage, the sacrifices, had been recognized in a way that mattered. The crowd began to leave, the sounds of laughter and conversation filling the stands. People moved past him without noticing, their attention elsewhere. And yet, he felt a connection that was invisible to them, a bond that had traveled across time and space, from past missions to this air show, from pilots who remembered to a man who had almost forgotten how to be honored. He felt a quiet pride, not in what others thought, but in knowing the truth of his own story. His child leaned into him again, small hands gripping his, asking what they would do next. He smiled, thinking of the simple joys that now defined his life. "We can get ice cream," he said softly. "Or maybe watch the planes one more time." The child giggled and nodded, eyes still sparkling from the show. The simplicity of this moment, the everyday choice, felt like a treasure after the weight of memory. As they walked toward the exit, he noticed how ordinary the world seemed. People chatting, waving to friends, taking photos, moving quickly from one thing to another. And yet, in his mind, the sky still held the message. The planes had spoken. Recognition had been given in silence, through motion and precision, through understanding without words. And it was enough. It was more than enough. He remembered the friends he had lost, the colleagues he had trusted, the missions that had defined him. All of it had been done without applause, without headlines, without public acknowledgement. And now, for the first time, he felt a sense of closure. The pilots above had remembered. They had spoken in their own way, and he had heard them. They stopped briefly at a small concession stand. The child chose a treat, excited, talking quickly about what had just happened. He listened, responding with short words, smiles, laughter. The world felt light, ordinary, yet extraordinary. Ordinary because it was everyday life. Extraordinary because the sky had whispered his truth, and he carried it quietly in his heart. As they walked to the parking lot, he thought about the lessons he wanted to pass on. Not about fame or accolades or recognition in public, but about courage, responsibility, dedication, and quiet strength. About the fact that true honor often exists without applause. About the importance of protecting and guiding those we love. He squeezed the child's hand, feeling the weight and the joy at once. The car ride home was quiet. The child talked intermittently, asking questions, making observations, sharing small stories. He answered calmly, letting the child's energy fill the space. The quiet inside him was still there, but softer now, mingling with gratitude. The moment had passed, but the impact remained. Recognition, though subtle, had found him, and that was a gift he could carry forward. At home, the evening settled in slowly. He made dinner, helped with small chores, laughed at little accidents, and listened to stories from the child's day. The world outside moved on, unconcerned with his past, unconcerned with the silent acknowledgement he had received. But inside, he felt whole. The day had reminded him that some gestures, some moments, some whispers of recognition can carry more meaning than years of public attention. He remembered his own father, long gone, and the lessons passed down quietly, often through example rather than words. And he realized that he was now the same for his child. The child would grow, would learn about courage, about dedication, about quiet strength. Some lessons were taught through stories, some through presence, some through subtle acknowledgement. Today had provided him with a living example of that. He tucked the child into bed, listening to the soft breathing, watching the gentle rise and fall of the chest. He kissed the forehead and whispered a promise to always be there, to always guide, to always protect. And he realized that recognition from the sky, acknowledgement from the pilots, was mirrored now in the small trust and love between him and his child. That was legacy. That was meaning. He sat in the quiet living room afterward, reflecting on the day. The air show, the jets, the whisper of his call sign, all seemed surreal in retrospect. Yet the feeling remained, a warmth and weight he could not shake. Life had given him a strange gift, a private acknowledgement of a life well lived, hidden yet remembered, quiet yet profound. He thought about the future, not about returning to the skies, not about chasing recognition, but about living fully, being present, teaching, protecting, loving. The day had reminded him that legacy is not built only in headlines or medals, but in moments of courage, in choices made quietly, in lives touched, in love given freely. That was the story he wanted to pass on. Later, he looked at the small hand still reaching for his. The child was asleep, but the presence was enough. He felt the connection, felt the continuity. Life moved forward, but memory, courage, and acknowledgement stayed. He realized that he had found peace, not in fame or attention, but in the knowledge that what he had done mattered, that he had been remembered, silently and profoundly, by those who understood. And he had passed that understanding forward, one quiet life at a time. The sky outside the window was darkening, stars beginning to appear. He thought of the planes, their precision, their message. And he smiled faintly. Recognition had come not with spectacle or fanfare, but with subtlety, respect, and understanding. And he carried it now, safely, quietly, into the life he led every day. He knew that no one else would ever fully understand the day's meaning, but that did not matter. The message had reached him. The acknowledgement had arrived. The whisper of Falcon 0 would remain with him forever, a quiet beacon of courage, legacy, and love. He felt complete in a way that applause could never provide, knowing that true honor lives in hearts, in moments, and in the bonds between people. Whether in the sky or on the ground, he turned off the light, leaving a small lamp glowing beside the bed. He sat for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the house, the soft breaths of his child, the gentle rhythm of life moving forward. The past had been acknowledged, the present was alive, and the future held possibility. He knew that the legacy he had received and would pass on was not about recognition in the world's eyes, but about the strength, courage, and love that persisted quietly through time. Finally, he stood, looking out the window once more. The stars shimmered, distant yet constant. He smiled, feeling the connection between sky and heart, past and present, service and family. He had been seen, honored, and remembered. And now he carried it forward, in the quiet life he led, in the child who trusted him, and in every ordinary, extraordinary moment that lay ahead.